Hi all, welcome back. In this video we're going to look at the signs of the different trig functions in each of the four quadrants. So let's first go ahead and draw a coordinate axes. And let's talk about, if we put a point in each one of those, what the x and the y values of that point will be, because our trig functions are defined from the x and the y values, and then what our r value will be in each of the four quadrants. So in quadrant 1, over here, the x value, if we picked a point anywhere in this quadrant, let's just say this point, it's going to have a positive x value, it's going to have a positive y value, and it's going to have a positive r value when we draw that triangle. From one of the earlier videos, if you remember, I said that r will always be positive. So how about in quadrant 2? If we picked a point in quadrant 2, we know the x value is always negative in quadrant 2. The y value is still in a positive direction, and again r is going to be positive. Let's move to quadrant 3. In quadrant 3 we have an x value that is negative, and here we have a y value that's negative, but our r value is still positive. And down here in quadrant 4, let's pick a point down here in quadrant 4, we have a positive x value, a negative y value, and our r value is still positive. So let's define which functions are positive in each of these quadrants, and all the other functions we'll just know are negative. So if we can memorize which functions are positive in each quadrant, we should be good, because the remaining functions will be negative. So in quadrant 1, because x, y, and r are all positive, and our trig functions that we have defined over here use x, y, and r, those are the only values, every single one of those functions will be positive in quadrant 1. So sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent will all be positive. So I'm going to mark this quadrant with an A for all. Alright, so let's move to quadrant 2. The ones that will be positive will only be the ones that have a y and an r value. If they have an x value, it will be negative. So sine has a y and an r value, so let's mark that one. Sine will definitely be positive. Cosine's negative because it has an x value. X positive over, or negative over a positive, is a negative. Tangent is y over x, so that's a positive over a negative, which is negative. Cosecant is r over y, that's a positive over a positive. So cosecant will be positive. Secant is r over x, positive over negative, so that's negative. Cotangent is a negative over a positive, so that is negative. So in quadrant 2, we only have functions that are associated with sine and its reciprocal. So I'm going to mark this with an S for sine and its reciprocal. So let's talk about quadrant 3. Both the x and the y are negative and the r value is positive. So if we take a look at sine, that would be a negative over a positive is a negative. Cosine is a negative over a positive, which is a negative. Tangent is a negative over a negative. That gives us a positive value. Okay, so then when we look at cosecant and secant, their reciprocals of sine and cosine, which we said were negative. So we're not going to include those. And then tangent or cotangent is a negative over a negative. So that makes its value positive. So in quadrant 3, we have all the functions that are associated with tangent and its reciprocal. So let's move on to quadrant 4. And in quadrant 4, x is positive, y is negative, and r is positive as well. So let's review sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Sine is going to be a negative over a positive, so that's negative. Cosine is a positive over a positive, so in this quadrant, we have cosine as a positive function. Tangent is a negative over a positive, nope, that's a negative. Cosecant, r is positive, y is negative, so that's going to be negative. Secant, r is positive and x is positive, so secant will be positive in quadrant 4. And lastly, tangent is a positive over a negative, that makes it negative. Therefore, let's see, in this quadrant, our cosine and its reciprocal. So I'm going to put a C in that quadrant so you can remember cosine and its reciprocal are positive. All the other functions are negative in quadrant 4. So an easy way to remember this, we've got two different ways. I remember the word acts, A-C-T-S, in a clockwise direction, A-C-T-S. If you can remember that, then you should be able to tell which of the trig functions are positive in which of the quadrants. Okay, so now knowing which of our trig functions are positive in which of the quadrants, we should be able to answer the questions at the bottom of our video here. It says determine the sines of the 6 trig functions of an angle in standard position with the measure, let's say 81 degrees. 81 degrees is going to fall in quadrant 1. I'm going to mark quadrant 1. And if we go up to our chart here, in quadrant 1 we have an A for all. All of those will be positive. So let me just mark next to each of my trig functions a plus for positive. Alright, we're done with the very first example. Next example, 300 degrees. The terminal side, if we drew an angle 300 degrees in standard position, 300 degrees would fall into quadrant 4. So let me mark quadrant 4 down here. And in quadrant 4 we have a C, meaning that only cosine and secant are positive. Cosine and its reciprocal. So the only two functions in that quadrant that are positive are cosine and secant. All the rest are going to be negative. So I will mark them as negative. Now we have a negative angle, so instead of going counterclockwise from 0 degrees, we're going to go clockwise. Negative 200, if we take a look at our coordinate axes, let's draw it over here really quick. Starting at 0 counterclockwise, this is negative 180, so we are going to be somewhere up here in quadrant 2 when we draw that in. So we're in quadrant 2. We see in quadrant 2 that we have a big S, so that tells us that we have sine and its reciprocal will be positive. So I'm going to mark sine and its reciprocal is positive. All the other functions will be negative. Okay, and that's how you find the sines of the trig functions given a particular angle.